Blog Talk Radio.
Well, here we go, ladies and gentlemen, across the airwaves. It's Tuesday, and we just started out today with Mark Heffernan's show out of Fresno, the Markman Madness. The guest was Jill Guerin, up-and-coming sports broadcaster with the Arizona Diamondbacks. So we'll get her across the airwaves, too. This is the show out of Cleveland. Move over the Browns so you can leave them in Miami. Move over the Cavaliers. I know they've lost a few. The Guardians, I know Terry Francona won Manager of the Year today, but nothing supersedes this show. This is the American Sports History Podcast hosted by a brother, a mentor, a friend, Peter Ray. Yours truly, Mark Mancini, producing it live in Los Angeles. Let me lay the red carpet. It's more of him, less of me. Put the podium in its place. Hand off the mic. First of all, Peter, the traditional threes. How are you? How can people get a hold of you? And the legend comes back out of Philly that you bring in here on a monthly basis, my friend.
Hi, Mark. I'm doing well. I have a YouTube channel. Its channel name is my name, Peter J. REA. We make history videos, and you're absolutely right. Tonight we have the author of 4 wonderful sports history books: Bench Bosses, the NHL's Coaching Elite 2015, The Art of the Dealers, the NHL's Greatest General Managers 2017, Lords of the Gridiron, College Football's Greatest Coaches 2019, and Lords of the Gridiron 2, Pro Football's Greatest Coaches 2022. Welcome to the show for the 4th time, Mr. Matthew DiBiase.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Mark. It's always an honor and privilege to be on your show, and I enjoy it so very much. Thank you.
Right. Well, I thank you for this. We're going to continuing with your book about pro football's greatest coaches, which is basically a wonderful pro football history book. And we're going to continue with the number 4th ranked coach, Vince Lombardi. I'd like to read the first several paragraphs of the chapter because they're so well written about Vince Lombardi. The most mythologized coach in pro football history, Vince Lombardi had the greatest impact in American sports and cultural folklore than any other NFL coach. His presence was so commanding that presidents from both political parties, John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon, courted and seduced him. Corporate America sought him out to find the same inspiration and motivation that his players sought as well. He became an American icon because he thrived and excelled during the period of enormous socio-political upheaval, where traditions, morals, cultural, spiritual norms, and institutions were being challenged, questioned, attacked, and sometimes overthrown by forces of change from all sectors of humanity. When all others collapsed or faltered from the buffeting, Vince Lombardi and his Green Bay Packers represented constancy, consistency, commitment, sacrifice, and Christian brotherhood, heroism in the face of long odds, overcoming not only opposing teams, but even sometimes Mother Nature itself, embodying values that faith coupled with the tireless striving for excellence could achieve victory. While generations young and old lost faith, grew disillusioned, and felt betrayal from the collapse of once hallowed institutions, they found comfort in the fact that Vince Lombardi's Green Bay Packers never broke faith, never fell short, and never betrayed the ideals that made them NFL champions. Vince Lombardi is the only NFL head coach to have his life portrayed in a Broadway play based on Dave Moranis' opus bio, When Pride Still Mattered. What are your thoughts on Vince Lombardi, Matthew DiBiase?
An absolute force. I mean, you know, how many other NFL coaches have multiple lines in Bartlett's quotations? I mean, winning isn't everything. It's the only thing. Fatigue makes cowards of us all. You know, that's just a small sampling of that. I mean, in Oliver Stone's movie, Any Given Sunday, he begins with a Vince Lombardi quotation. I mean, too lengthy to recite here. But, I mean, he begins with Vince. And, in fact, his character, you know, there's a stage photograph of Pacino standing next to Lombardi there. I mean, he's like a ghost, you know. I mean, of all that we revere and honor in pro football there. I mean, an absolute force of personality. I mean, you think about it, the only coach portrayed in Broadway, not George Halas, not Paul Brown, not Bill Belichick, not, Don Shula. It's Vince. And, I mean, it just It's in only 10 seasons of coaching, and yet the impact he had is just absolutely. The fact that he began in the 60s, when television really elevated the NFL. He was the first television coach. I mean, first in black and white, then in bold, brilliant color. Especially when you look at that Ice Bowl footage. Just the sacrifice, everything. The voice. He appeared on What's My Line. I mean, listening to the voice, you could not ignore him. Steve Sable told Dave Moranis that in that book, When Pride Still Matters, said it was the voice. You dared not ignore it. You could not ignore it. You had to obey it. You had to heed it, and they did. And that's why the Packers became, 5-time NFL champions, under Vince Lombardi. I mean, he took these players and he elevated them. I mean, almost all the major players are in the Hall of Fame. I mean, they just keep, almost the entire offensive line. Bart Starr, Paul Hornung, Nitschke, if I played for any other coach, they probably wouldn't have made it to the Hall of Fame, and yet they did it under him because he got them to take it to a level, a Mount Everest type of level that actually no other pro football coach in the postseason era, which begins in 1933, has ever attained. I mean, according to my calculations, Vince Lombardi was the greatest coach in terms of average season rating during the postseason era from 33 to the present time, and getting consistent maximum effort out of his players. No other coach has surpassed him in that score there, and during the postseason era. And the fact that the only coach to win 3 consecutive NFL championships from 65, 66, and 67 in the postseason era, it still hasn't been equaled, let alone surpassed. To do it today, you must win 3 consecutive Super Bowls, and that's never been done. And to surpass it, you would have to win 4 consecutive Super Bowls. I mean, the fact that you can't even win 3, let alone equal it, forget about even surpassing it. Just getting into multiple, Marv Levy had 4 consecutive appearances, and he lost all 4. It's just... it boggles the mind. I don't see anyone, especially in this day with free agency as being as it are, dilution of talent. I don't see anyone even equaling that goal, let alone surpassing it. It would be shocking if it ever happened. But that was Vince Lombardi.
Yeah, looking through my notes from the chapter, Green Bay got the name Titletown during Lombardi's time. His parents were Italian immigrants. He was a Roman Catholic Christian, went to Mass every day. And that book by David Moranis, When Pride Still Matters, I read it, and it's a tremendous book. And from what I remember in the book, he asked God for forgiveness every day or, regularly for the things he felt he had to do as coach that troubled him. And he would arrive in a city and go to find the closest Catholic church, and sometimes he'd ask them to change the mass. He wanted to go first thing in the morning to Mass, and sometimes he'd ask them to change the Mass schedule for him. Sometimes they would. Now, at Fordham University, 1933, his coach, when he was in college, was Jim Crowley, who was on the 1924 Notre Dame team that had the 4 horsemen. Nice reference to the Bible: war, famine, pestilence, and death. So that's really cool history. And Crowley's coach was Newt Rockne. Again, tremendous. Lombardi, when he played in college, the 6 linemen were called the 7 blocks of granite. How cool is that? And in '53 with the Giants, he coached Frank Gifford, Kyle Rote. And then '59 Packers, Forrest Gregg, who came to coach Cleveland. Paul Hornung. And then, you mentioned those great quotes. Fatigue makes cowards of us all. And and he died at 57, very tragic. Of course, the Super Bowl trophy is named after him, and won the first 2 Super Bowls. And so, anyway, any other thoughts on Vince Lombardi, Matthew DiBiase?
The thing about Vince is just... it wasn't just Jim Crowley he learned. Also, it was Frank Leahy, who was the offensive line coach at Fordham. So that's another Notre Dame connection right there. It was just the thing is about Vince. For all of his grandiosity, there was also a humility to him. I remember reading one book about coach by Tom Dowling, which was about his season with the Redskins. Dowling interviewed the local, was it Cardinal or Bishop at Green Bay, and they talked about Vince as a parishioner. And they said, you know, Vince, no one would have blamed him if he had a monumental ego, but the thing was, no, Vince was a deeply humble man. Like, whenever he visited that official, he insisted on kissing his ring. I mean, he said, Vince, you don't have to do this. And no, Your Eminence, I have to do this, you know, because that's what you're supposed to do. I mean, so there was that humility, which some aspects you don't see in other great coaches. I mean, he always recognized his role before God in that sense. The fact that he always went to confession. He knew that his temper and his profanity were sins and all that. He acknowledged it. He knew it was a losing battle, but the fact that he had the courage and character to see them as weaknesses, whereas there's some coaches like Bobby Knight or whatever who would never acknowledge their weaknesses as weaknesses and take steps to combat them and all that. Lombardi was different. There was a humility there, and I find that quite refreshing about Vince, especially in these days where you see rampant egos, not just in sports, but, you know, the political sphere, economics and all that, you know, grandiosity and self-promotion and self-glorification. I find that most refreshing in that sense, and I wish you would see other people embodying that same sense of humility.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's we need to value it. It's such an important virtue, and we don't seem to value it now. It's almost like we think humility is weakness, and it's not. It's strength. So that's Paul Hornung, Jerry Kramer, Bart Starr, all these legendary players. And his death at 50. So you have to wonder how much he drove himself to excel as a coach, and if his early death was connected to the stress he was under as a coach.
Well, he died of colorectal cancer. Back then, cancer screening was very much, it was not the way it is now. I wonder if in today's world it could have been discovered earlier and could have been treated earlier and Vince could have been saved. But back then, cancer detection was still kind of in its primitive stages. I know he used to smoke, but then he quit in the early 60s and all that. But it was just the medicine of the time, as it were. I mean, definitely the stress factors. I mean, that's why he quit after the 67 season. It was crushing him. It was literally crushing him. And his wife kind of insisted that he retire for his health's sake and all that. But he had to get back into the game, and the challenge of rebuilding the Redskins was so irresistible. And he got that offer of stock in the team, which is also what he wanted. He wanted part ownership, and he got that. You know, he got 2 or 3% of the stock of the team from Edward Bennett Williams. It would have been fascinating if he had been allowed to continue. Whether he could, I have no doubt he would have taken to the Super Bowl. The question is how long it would have taken for him to rebuild that team and get them to go all the way.
Hi, Peter and Matt. It's Cliff from Seekonk, Massachusetts. That Virginia shooting was horrible. Any comments, Matthew DiBiase?
I know, it is horrible. It's interesting you come from Seekonk. My Uncle Vincent in 1973 got married to his second wife, my Aunt Miriam, in Seekonk, Massachusetts. So thanks for the memory. Thanks for bringing back the memories, okay? To me, it's just, we were talking about that just before we went on air, and I think what bothers me is the attitude, if something bad happens to me, the answer is committing mass murder. I got an F in school, I need to commit mass murder. My girlfriend left me, I need to commit mass murder. Oh, someone lost my favorite candidate lost the election, I need to commit mass murder. And it's a sickness, and it's scary, and it's sickness. People that murder is a form of relieving your ache, and it isn't. It's the old Oriental thing. If you're bent on revenge, you need to dig 2 graves, one for your victim or victims, and the other for yourself. And unfortunately, people don't learn that adage, and it's horrible, man. I mean, I don't own guns, man. They scare me, man. They really scare me, and I've never owned a gun, and I hope to God I never will.
I hate to say it, but my take on it is there are people who are very, very unhappy, and that unhappiness goes on and on and on for a long. Because I've had times in my life where I had horrific unhappiness that lasted for a long, long time, and I'd see people I thought who were I had depression where I couldn't do anything. And then I'd see people busy, active, seemingly happy, and I was like, oh, and I was jealous, really. And it seems to me like these, and so to be honest, I hate to say it, but I could imagine myself doing that, not now, but in the past because I just, there are people who are so unhappy, they want to spread it. They want, okay, my life is hell. I'm going to bring some other. My life is terrible. I'm going to make some other people's life. That's because I had that train of thought myself. Thank God I didn't do something like that. But Dave from Oceanside, California, looks like Dan Snyder does not want to leave. He has dirt on these NFL owners. Any comments, Matthew?
Oh. When it's always the typical mentality. If I'm going to go down, I want to take as many people over the cliff with me. It's moral cowardice, as it were. I mean, it's disgusting and all that. I feel sad for it. I mean, I've known a lot of Redskins fans. And when I look at that team, I still think of them as Redskins. I mean, I don't care if it's not PC or not. I mean, I see those uniforms. You know what it looks like? A two-bit semi-pro team. It just, I mean, that old Redskins uniform looked grand. It was magnificent. It was one of the finest-looking NFL uniforms of all time. And now they look like a semi-pro team, even though they beat my Eagles last night. I mean, they look like a semi-pro team. And I mean, they didn't play like a semi-pro team, but I can't take it seriously. I'm sorry. It's like the Cleveland Indians. I mean, I still think of them as Indians, man. I don't know. I can't wrap my head around it. I understand the need of some things for political correctness, but sometimes, man, it just goes a little too far, man. I don't know. Lash me with a wet noodle, man. I know. I apologize if I offend anybody out there. I mean, I understand the need for it. I mean, I'm not insensitive because guess what? I'm a 1/16 Cherokee Indian myself from my mother's side. But I don't know, man. It's not making it, man. Those uniforms ain't making it. That name, it just doesn't hack it, man. I'm sorry. Forgive me.
Sam from Warren, Ohio. Congratulations to Terry Francona, Manager of the Year in the American League.
Yeah. Hey, Francona, when I write my next book, Patriarchs of the Dugout, Baseball's Greatest Managers, Terry Francona will be featured in my book as one of the top 50. And Warren, Ohio, that's where my Aunt Dot came from. Yeah, she was born in Warren, Ohio. So another nice little family connection there.
Yeah, I was also very against this change of the Indians to Guardians, and then I heard I think September, August. I heard that Terry Francona is said next year, 2023 would be his last year, and he's our secret weapon. He's been our secret weapon because he's just. I think he's just these young guys who did so well with Cleveland this year. I think a large part. I mean, they did good in scouting and developing, but Francona has the ability to just infuse guys with confidence. Instead of the traditional managers would yell at guys and everything, but he and I think he really loves them. And so to me, I thought, well, okay, I'm going to support the team now, even though the name changed because he accepted it. And so I feel we're very fortunate to have Terry Francona in Cleveland.
I would love to see Francona end the curse of the Cleveland team. I mean, they now have the longest World Series drought of any American League team, and they haven't done it since '48. They haven't won since '48. I would love to see him break that thing, just like he broke the curse of the Bambino. That was the most beautiful thing in the world.
Yeah, it was, and when he won 2 titles with the Red Sox and got fired, he said in his biography, "I guess I should have won another title." I thought, how could you? And I know here they'll never fire him because he's just they're smart enough to see, even though we haven't won a World Series with him. Denise from San Francisco. Hi guys, I love this show. You two bring stability to a havoc world. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you.
Any comments, Matthew?
Oh man, it's stability in a havoc world. That's a new one on me. I mean, I've always had a struggle maintaining my stability. I mean, Peter, you were talking about you had a painful youth. I too had a very painful childhood. I mean, I was severely bullied as a student, in my K through 12 years, and I mean, I knew desperation too, but the thing was, I also had a strong sense of right and wrong, and the idea. Well, one, there were no guns in my household. My parents didn't own guns, but the idea of me committing mass murder, just to assuage my pain, was utterly anathema to me. I mean, I didn't ever wanted to see anyone getting hurt. I was that sensitive a child, as it were. So now in this day and age, where you see people, lashing out with guns, for actually, I mean, that's why I became a writer. Writing actually helped heal me. I started writing when I was 17 years old, and it was my way of coping with the pain. I was writing poetry and song lyrics, and that was my way of coping with my pain and anguish. I took my pain and suffering and converted it into something good instead of taking a darker route, and committing crimes and hurting or destroying innocent people, and as it were. And I think we need to teach kids how to take pain and try to convert it into something good. Violence is not an answer. Rage is not an answer. Destroying other people is never an answer. Instead, do something positive. Do something beautiful. Paint something. Write something. Do something good. Help people out. At least try to make other people happy, as it were, instead of destroying. It's so easy to destroy. It's a lot tougher? Not doing that, but it's a lot more rewarding. And you don't die, and you don't go to jail, and you don't send other people to their deaths. And that's the lesson I have to impart, and thus ended the sermon.
I agree with you completely. Absolutely. Yeah. Now, moving on, the next guy in your list of the greatest NFL coaches, Curly Lambeau.
Yeah, well, the man whom they named the Lambeau Field after. I mean, Vince Lombardi made Green Bay title town, but the man who created the Green Bay Packers was Curly Lambeau. I mean, he was working at the Indian Packing Company in Green Bay, Wisconsin. He and a partner borrowed $500 from the owner to build a pro team, a company team. And for 1919 and 1920, they took on other company teams in Wisconsin. And then finally in 1921, they applied for what was called the American Professional Football Association, that later in 1922 became the National Football League. And thus, the Packers are still the last vestige of that small town Midwestern football that existed in the early years of the NFL, where you had the Canton Bulldogs, the Portsmouth Spartans, the Oorang Indians, the Pottsville Maroons. They're that last vestige of that small town pro football legacy there. And it took some time, but year by year he built up that team, and then finally 1929 to 1930, 1931, 3 consecutive NFL titles. Even though there was no postseason back then, it was the first NFL team, to do it 3 straight years as one single team there. And then, according to my calculations, he was the greatest NFL coach of the 1930s, according to my calculations. I mean, the Packers, the Bears, the Giants, and then later in the 30s, the Redskins were the most dominant teams in the NFL. And he was the first NFL coach to win 6 NFL titles until 1963 that George Halas tied him. I mean, when he retired from coaching, he was second only to George Halas in wins. And he was a force of nature. He was one of the few coaches to emphasize the passing game, whereas in the old days it was all running and all that. He signed Don Hudson, the man who he was the NFL receiving record book there, the greatest pass catcher in the NFL in the 30s and the 40s. I mean, the one everyone had to surpass, in years to come. And he laid the foundations. And he was a great coach. Now, in his private life, though, unlike Lombardi, he was a bit of a Lothario. I mean, he had multiple marriages, multiple divorces. I mean, he was a philanderer. I mean, Lombardi, who knew Lambeau in the last years of his life, never really cared for him. In fact, when it came time to name the stadium Lambeau Field, Lombardi resisted it. He did not. He resisted. He wanted it something else, but no, the Packers board of directors overrode Lombardi on that one issue there, and that's why Lambeau Field today remains one of NFL's most hallowed grounds, in today's NFL. The frozen tundra, as it were. But
go ahead.
He was a character. I mean, not exactly beloved like his players. I mean, sometimes he would vie with his players to seduce women and all of that. I mean, he was a Lothario there. Yeah.
And he was to me it's cool, you see Green Bay Packers and then to find out here this is a guy who just has a job working for this Indian meat packing company.
Yeah.
And so the name comes from that, from meat packing, pack and he says oh, let's have a team, so this very humble beginning, and then he was coach for 1921 to 1949, so that's an incredible amount of span, the 20s, 30s, and 40s.
Yeah.
And then he himself played at Notre Dame for Knute Rockne again. This one of the legendary coaches, and one of his teammates was George Gipp, and of course that's one of the most famous quotes of all time. Let's win one for the Gipper. Right.
Yeah, the real Gipper. Yeah, the real Gipper. Yeah.
The real one. Yeah. So that's
the real one.
And then you mentioned Don Hudson, Johnny McNally, also known as Johnny Blood.
Oh man, what a character! The Errol Flynn of the NFL in the 20s and the 30s. Why no one ever made a movie out of his exploits is beyond me. Because you could make a movie out of some of the things he did, not just on the field but off the field. He was that crazy. What a character, unforgettable, completely. Yeah.
Sal from Germantown, Pennsylvania. Go Philadelphia Phillies, Eagles, Sixers, and Flyers. Rocky cheesesteaks and Liberty Bell.
Yeah, I mean with the Phillies, I was just amazed as everyone else. But I think the secret was their expectation was merely to make the playoffs, just earn a playoff berth any which way you can. Well, they did it. So in a sense, the moment they reached that berth, they had accomplished their seasonal goals. So everything else was gravy. So they just kept playing loose. They were having fun, enormous amounts of fun. And out of that looseness, somehow they were able to steal wins, and they were winning the wild card round and the LDS and then the LCS. And they had a 2-1 lead in the World Series, but it was because they were just having fun. I mean, that's the thing to consider when you go into it. In other words, stop letting expectations crush you. Just have fun with this. Go as far as you can and make the most of what you got. I mean, I was shocked that they went as far as they did, but it was beautiful. It was fantastic. If that no-hitter hadn't taken place in Game 4, that was the hinge of fate. If they had just won Game 4, they would have won that series. But when they lost Game 4, I knew it was gone. But they weren't going to win the series because it was going to go back to Houston, and Houston simply had too much depth. Pitching, especially pitching depth, and that made all the difference in the world. But the fact that they won the pennant, that's stupendous. Hopefully they can get some pitching depth of their own and go further next season and all of that. But it was beautiful while it lasted.
Now I was going to get into Don Shula, but I'd rather not. So let's talk. Anything? You have any more thoughts on either Vince Lombardi or Curly Lambeau?
Well, in terms of Lambeau, is that again he was emphasizing passing when everyone else was running. I mean, he settled upon the 1920s. He explained to himself in one game he was using the ground game, but he had one game several of his running backs got badly injured, and he decided I got to conserve my backfield. So he went to the passing attack, and he saw that it was cutting down on injuries and all that, and he decided to go with it. And it took a while, and then finally we got Arnie Herbert in the late 20s. Herbert, despite being small in size and slow of foot, was a very good passer, and he was the first passer. And then he got Cecil Isbell in the late 30s. He drafted him, and Isbell was another great passer whose career was very short. He left in 1942. But, I mean, for a time he held the NFL record for most touchdown passes in a season with 24. Which back then was extraordinary, extremely extraordinary. Today, it's a rather mediocre record if you only throw 24 touchdown passes. But back then, that was stupendous. And he always kept going with the passing. And he had Don Hudson, who just was the most supreme wide receiver of his era there. And he wasn't exactly a great X's and O's guy, but he was able to find his talents, and he was able to keep them together and all of that. And he was able to get effort out of his players. And again, he was a great coach. People forget now, but he really was a stupendous coach for his era.
Our guest has been Mr. Matthew DiBiase, and we've been talking about his tremendous book, Lords of the Gridiron 2, Pro Football's Greatest Coaches 2022. Matthew, do you have any final comments tonight for our audience?
Yes, my book, Lords of the Gridiron 2, Pro Football's Greatest Coaches, is up at Amazon. You can only get it at Amazon. It's not available in stores. It's at 30% off and will remain on sale at 30% off until after Super Bowl 57 is played. So go out and get it. It's a beautiful stocking stuffer, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you.
Oh, I have it, and I'm reading it and very much enjoying it, and I'm very grateful to you, Matthew, for your work, because, like I said, this is American Sports History Podcast, and this is just a tremendous NFL history book. What a way one way of going about it by focusing on the great coaches. So I think I highly recommend it and really love it. And we'll schedule Matthew to be on for 4 weeks from tonight. Next week we're going to have Bill North again, the center fielder and leadoff hitter for the coolest MLB team of all time, the Oakland A's from the early 1970s.
Yeah.
Dear listener, may the road rise to meet you. May the wind be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face and rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much again, Mr. Matthew DiBiase.
May God bless you too, Peter. God bless you.
God bless you.
Amen. All right.